In the heart of Paris, 1789, the air was thick with the scent of unrest. The cobblestone streets of the Faubourg Saint-Antoine buzzed with whispers of discontent. As bakers raised the price of bread yet again, Jean-Paul Marat, a physician turned agitator, stood atop a wooden crate in a crowded square. His voice hoarse but piercing. "The king feasts while we starve," he bellowed, his words igniting the crowd like a match to dry tinder. Men in tattered coats and women clutching hungry children roared in agreement, their anger a palpable force. Across the city, in the opulent halls of Versailles, King Louis XVI sat uneasily on his throne. His queen, Marie Antoinette, adorned in silk and pearls, dismissed the murmurs of rebellion with a wave of her fan. "Let them eat cake," she was rumored to have said, though no one could confirm the words. The royal court, insulated by wealth and tradition, seemed oblivious to the storm brewing beyond their gilded walls. Yet, the king's advisors, men like the cautious Necker and the pragmatic Mirabeau, urged reform. The treasury was bankrupt, drained by wars and extravagance, and the Third Estate, commoners who bore the tax burden, demanded representation. In the taverns of Paris, men like Georges Danton and Camille Desmoulins plotted over cheap wine. Danton, a hulking lawyer with a voice like thunder, spoke of justice. The nobles cling to their privileges like drowning men to wreckage, he growled. Desmoulins, wary and quick-witted, scribbled pamphlets that spread like wildfire, calling for a new order. Their words reached the ears of Maximilien Robespierre, a reserved lawyer from Arras, whose icy demeanor hid a burning idealism. He believed in a republic of virtue, where all men were equal before the law. The Estates General, a long-dormant assembly, was summoned to address the crisis. In May, representatives of the clergy, nobility, and commoners gathered at Versailles. The Third Estate, led by fiery orators like Abbas C.S., refused to be silenced. "What is the Third Estate?" "Everything," C.S. declared in a pamphlet that electrified the masses. When the king locked them out of their meeting hall, they convened on a tennis court, swearing the tennis court oath to draft a constitution. The spark of revolution was lit. On July 14, the storm broke. A mob, fueled by hunger and rage, marched on the Bastille, an ancient fortress and symbol of royal tyranny. The prison held few inmates, but its armory was stocked with gunpowder. The crowd, armed with muskets, pikes, and sheer desperation, clashed with the garrison. Blood stained the stones as the fortress fell. Its governor's head paraded on a pike. The fall of the Bastille sent shockwaves through France and beyond, a signal that the people would no longer bow. In the countryside, panic spread. Peasants, fearing noble reprisals, attacked chateaux, burning feudal records and seizing land. The Great Fear, as it was called, forced the National Assembly to act. On August 4, nobles renounced their privileges in a late-night session, abolishing serfdom and tithes. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen followed, proclaiming liberty, equality, and fraternity. Yet, the king hesitated to approve these decrees, stoking suspicion. In October, a crowd of women, enraged by bread shortages, marched on Versailles. Armed with knives and makeshift weapons, they stormed the palace, forcing the royal family to return to Paris under guard. The Tuileries Palace became their gilded cage, and the National Assembly followed, now under the watchful eye of the Parisian masses. The revolution was no longer a distant idea. It was a living, breathing force, unpredictable and unstoppable. For men like Robespierre, the revolution was a moral crusade. For Danton, it was a fight for power. For Marat, it was vengeance. And for the countless unnamed bakers, laborers, mothers, it was survival. As 1789 drew to a close, France stood on a precipice. The old regime was crumbling. But what would rise in its place? In the shadows, a young Corsican officer named Napoleon Bonaparte watched, his ambitions stirring like embers in the wind. The streets of Paris grew quieter at night, but the tension never faded. Cafes hummed with debate, and printing presses churned out radical broadsheets. The revolution had begun, but its path was uncertain. Would it bring liberty or chaos, equality or tyranny? The answers lay in the years ahead, in the hearts of those who dared to dream and those who dared to fight. In the spring of 1790, Paris pulsed with a restless energy, its streets a crucible of hope and suspicion. The revolution, barely a year old, had toppled the Bastille and forced the king into the Tuileries. But the path forward was murky. The National Assembly, now seated in a converted writing school near the palace, wrestled with a new constitution. While factions formed like fault lines in the earth, the air was thick with the smell of ink from printing presses and the sharp tang of fear, as every pamphlet and whisper carried the weight of destiny. In a dimly lit café on the Rue Saint-Honoré, Georges Danton held court, his massive frame dwarfing the rickety table. His face, scarred and rugged, seemed carved from the same stone as the revolution itself. The nobles plot in the shadows, and the king plays the fool. He roared, slamming a fist down. The crowd, artisans, clerks, and laborers leaned in, hanging on his word. We must seize liberty, not beg for it. Beside him, Camille Desmoulins, his eyes bright with fervor, scribbled notes for a new pamphlet. The people are the revolution, Desmoulins said softly, his quill scratching. But they need a voice, across the city. In the Jacobin Club's meeting hall, Maximilien Robespierre stood at a podium, his voice measured but unyielding. Dressed in a plain green coat, he lacked Danton's charisma but commanded attention with his precision. Virtue demands sacrifice, he said, his pale eyes scanning the room. We cannot compromise with tyranny, whether it wears a crown or a title. The Jacobins, a mix of lawyers, journalists, and radicals, cheered, their ideals rooted in Rousseau's vision of equality. Yet, Robespierre's words carried a chill, a hint of the unrelenting justice he envisioned. The revolution was not unified. The Girondins, led by men like Brissot and Roland, sought a moderate path. From Bordeaux and the provinces, they championed a republic, but feared the Parisian mob's volatility. In the assembly, Brissot argued for gradual reform, his eloquence winning allies among the wealthy bourgeoisie. We must build a nation of laws, not blood, he urged, his voice drowned by jeers from the radical left. His wife, Madame Roland, hosted salons where ideas flowed as freely as wine. But her influence drew suspicion from men like Marat, who saw her as a scheming aristocrat in disguise. Jean-Paul Marat, holed up in a damp basement, churned out his newspaper, L'Ami du Peuple. His skin, ravaged by a chronic illness, itched as he wrote, but his rage was unrelenting. The Girondins are traitors, and the king is a serpent, he scrawled, his words venomous. Marat's readers, the sans-culottes, working-class men in rough trousers, devoured his calls for vengeance. Armed with pikes and fueled by hunger, they roamed Paris, ready to strike at any hint of betrayal. The king, Louis XV, remained a focal point of division. Trapped in the Tuileries, he played a dangerous game, publicly supporting the revolution while secretly appealing to foreign monarchs. In June 1791, his attempt to flee Paris with his family ended in humiliation at Varennes. Disguised as servants, they were recognized by a postmaster who matched the king's face to a coin. Dragged back to Paris under guard, Louis lost what little trust remained. He is no king, but a prisoner, Danton declared in a tavern, his words echoed by the crowd. Robespierre, in the Jacobin Club, was colder. The monarchy itself is the enemy. The flight to Varennes inflamed tensions. In the Champ de Mars, a crowd gathered to demand a republic. Their petition drafted by Desmoulins, the National Guard, under Lafayette, fired on the protesters, killing dozens. The massacre shocked Paris, turning moderates like Lafayette into pariahs. The revolution eats its own, Desmoulins muttered, his idealism shaken. For Robespierre, the bloodshed was a warning. Only purity could save the cause. War loomed on the horizon, adding fuel to the factional fires. Austria and Prussia, alarmed by the revolution's spread, threatened invasion to restore Louis. The Girondins, eager to unite the nation, pushed for war, believing it would expose royal treachery. War will purify us, Brissot proclaimed in the assembly. Robespierre disagreed, his voice sharp. War will empower generals and bankrupt the people. He warned, foreseeing chaos. The sans-culottes, however, saw war as a chance to crush aristocrats abroad and at home. Far from Paris, in Corsica, a young artillery officer named Napoleon Bonaparte watched the revolution unfold. Stationed in Ajaccio, he navigated the island's fractious politics, torn between Corsican nationalism and French loyalty. At 22, his ambition burned quietly. He read Rousseau and Voltaire, debated with local radicals, and studied military tactics late into the night. France is a volcano, he wrote to his brother Joseph. Its eruptions will reshape the world. The revolution's chaos was his opportunity, though he remained a minor player, his name unknown beyond Corsica. In Paris, the Assembly struggled to govern. The new Constitution of 1791 created a constitutional monarchy, but the king's duplicity undermined it. Taxes went unpaid, and bread remained scarce. The sans-culottes grew bolder, storming bakeries and clashing with guards. Women, like the fishmonger Pauline Léon, formed clubs, demanding a voice. We marched to Versailles, we'll march again, Léon. Her words rallying others. The revolution was no longer the domain of educated men. It belonged to the streets. By late 1791, the factions hardened. The Girondins held sway in the assembly, but the Jacobins dominated the clubs. Marat's pen and Danton's voice fueled the sans-culottes, while Robespierre's vision of a virtuous republic gained followers. The moderates, caught between reform and radicalism, lost ground. In the Tuileries, the king penned letters to Austria, begging for intervention. In Corsica, Napoleon secured a minor command, his eyes fixed on the mainland. The revolution was a river, its currents pulling in every direction. For Danton, it was a battle for power. For Robespierre, a quest for purity. For Marat, a cry for justice. For the sans-culottes, it was survival. And for Napoleon, it was a stage, vast and unformed, where a man of genius might rise. As 1791 ended, France teetered on the edge of war and upheaval, its fate in the hands of those who dared to shape it. By the spring of 1792, Paris was a city on the edge of a blade. The revolution, now 3 years old, had shattered the old order, but its promises of liberty and bread remained unfulfilled. The streets teemed with sans-culottes, their pikes glinting in the April sun, while the National Assembly's debates grew shrill. War with Austria, declared in April, hung over France like a storm cloud, stirring both patriotism and dread. The monarchy, weakened by the king's flight to Varennes, was a hollow shell, and the question of its fate divided the nation. In the Courdauders Club, Georges Danton's voice boomed over a raucous crowd. War is upon us, and the king cannot be trusted, he thundered, his scarred face flushed with passion. Let us forge a republic, not a battlefield for tyrants. The sans-culottes cheered, their hunger for change matched only by their hunger for food. Camille Desmoulins, at Danton's side, distributed pamphlets calling for the king's deposition. Loewy is a puppet of Vienna, he wrote, his words sharp as a guillotine's edge. The crowd, a mix of bakers, butchers, and laborers, carried his words into the streets. Across the river, in the Jacobin Club, Maximilien Robespierre spoke with chilling clarity. The monarchy is a cancer, he said, his voice low but piercing. To save the revolution, we must cut it out. His allies, including the fiery Louis Antoine Saint-Just, nodded grimly. Saint-Just, barely 25, had a face like a marble statue, and a mind honed by radical ideals. Revolution demands courage, he said, and courage demands blood. The Jacobins, once a debating society, were now a force, their influence spreading through Paris and beyond. The Girondins, led by Jacques-Pierre Brissot, held sway in the new Legislative Assembly. They saw war as a way to rally France and expose royal treachery. Victory will unite us, Brissot argued, his optimism clashing with Robespierre's warnings. War will ruin us, Robespierre countered, foreseeing military dictatorship. But the Girondins prevailed, and French armies marched the frontier, only to face early defeats. Panic spread, and rumors of aristocratic plots fueled paranoia. Jean-Paul Marat, scribbling in his dank hideout, fanned the flames. His L'Ami du Peuple screamed of betrayal. The generals are traitors, the nobles are vipers, and the king is their puppet, he wrote, his words devoured by the sans-culottes. Saint-Rat's calls for vigilance turned deadly in September 1792, when Prussian armies advanced toward Paris. Fearing counter-revolution, mobs stormed the city's prisons, slaughtering over 1,000 inmates, nobles, priests, and commoners alike. The September massacres, as they were called, left blood pooling in the streets and a stain on the revolution's soul. This is justice, Marat declared. But even Danton, no stranger to violence, recoiled. We cannot build liberty on corpses, he muttered. The massacres coincided with a seismic shift. On August 10, 1792, the sans-culottes, backed by radical National Guard units, stormed the Tuileries Palace. Swiss guards, loyal to the king, fought bravely but were overwhelmed, their bodies littering the courtyards. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette fled to the Assembly, where they were stripped of power. The monarchy was suspended, and the Legislative Assembly called for a national convention to draft a republican constitution. The king is finished, Desmoulins exulted, but Robespierre was cautious. The republic is not won by storming palaces, he said. It is won by vigilance. The National Convention convened in September, its members elected by universal male suffrage. The Girondins and Jacobins vied for control, while unaffiliated deputies, known as the Plain, held the balance. The convention's first act was to abolish the monarchy, proclaiming the French Republic on September 22, 1792. Church bells rang, and crowds danced in the streets, but the joy was fleeting. The question of the king's fate loomed. Louis XVI, now called Louis Capet, was imprisoned in the Temple, a grim fortress in Paris. The convention debated his trial, with the Girondins urging caution, and the Jacobins demanding death. Robespierre, once hesitant, now saw the king's execution as a moral necessity. To spare Louis is to betray the people, he argued, his voice unwavering. Saint Just was blunter. A king is a crime. Evidence of Louis's secret letters to Austria, found in a hidden safe, sealed his fate. In December, the convention voted to try him for treason. The trial, held in the convention's hall, was a spectacle. Louis, pale and stooped, faced his accusers with quiet dignity. "I am no traitor," he said, his voice steady, but the deputies, swayed by Jacobin rhetoric and public pressure, were unforgiving. In January 1793, the vote came, 30-61 for death, 30-60 for imprisonment or exile. The deciding vote, cast by Louis's cousin, the Duke of Orleans, shocked the hall. "Death," he said, his voice hollow. On January 21, Louis ascended the guillotine. In the Place de la Révolution, the blade fell, and the crowd roared, some dipping handkerchiefs in his blood. "The tyrant is dead," a sans-culotte shouted, but others wept, sensing the revolution's darkening path. Far from Paris, in Corsica, Napoleon Bonaparte followed the news with keen interest. Now 23, he commanded a battalion of volunteers, but his loyalties were tested. Corsica's leader, Pasquale Paoli, leaned toward independence, clashing with French authorities. Napoleon, ambitious and pragmatic, chose France, fleeing the island with his family after a rift with Paoli. "The Republic is my future," he told his brother Lucien, his mind already on the mainland's opportunities. In Toulon, he joined Republican forces besieging Royalist rebels, his artillery skills catching the eye of superiors. In Paris, the king's death sent shockwaves. Europe's monarchs, horrified, tightened their coalition against France. The Girondins, blamed for military failures, lost ground to the Jacobins. The sans-culottes, emboldened, demanded price controls and harsher measures against traitors. Women like Pauline Léon and Claire Lacombe formed radical societies, their voices rising. "We are the Republic's heart," Lacombe declared, rallying her allies. The Republic was born, but it was fragile. War raged on multiple fronts, and internal enemies, royalists, refractory priests, and Girondin moderates, threatened its survival. Robespierre, Danton, and Marat, though uneasy allies, agreed on one thing: the revolution must be defended at all costs. As 1793 dawned, France stood at a crossroads, its ideals tested by violence and its future uncertain. In the shadows, Napoleon waited, his moment drawing near. In the autumn of 1793, Paris was a city gripped by fear and fervor. The French Republic, barely a year old, teetered under the weight of war, rebellion, and betrayal. The guillotine, erected in the Place de la Révolution, cast a long shadow, its blade rising and falling with mechanical precision. The Committee of Public Safety, a 12-man body led by Maximilien Robespierre, Georges Danton, and Louis-Antoine Saint-Just, ruled with an iron hand, vowing to save the revolution at any cost. The reign of terror had begun, and its hunger for blood seemed insatiable. In the Jacobin Club, Robespierre stood before a packed hall, his voice calm but unyielding. "The Republic is surrounded by enemies," he said, his green coat immaculate despite the chaos outside. "Traitors lurk within, nobles, priests, and false patriots. We must purify the nation." His words, laced with the moral certainty of a zealot, electrified the crowd. Saint-Just, his young ally, added a colder edge. "Revolution is not mercy," he declared, his dark eyes gleaming. "It is justice." The Jacobins, now the revolution's vanguard, cheered, ready to root out counter-revolutionaries. The committee's decrees were relentless. The law of suspects branded anyone with unpatriotic tendencies a traitor. From aristocrats hoarding grain to shopkeepers grumbling about taxes, revolutionary tribunals, presided over by men like Antoine Fouquier-Tinville, dispensed swift verdicts, death or acquittal, with little in between. The guillotine claimed thousands: men, women, even children, its blade dulled by constant use. Crowds gathered daily, some cheering, others trembling, as carts rumbled through Paris, carrying the condemned to their fate. Georges Danton, once the revolution's roaring lion, grew uneasy. In a tavern near the Palais Royal, he confided to Camille Desmoulins over mugs of sour wine. "This is madness," he growled, his massive frame slouched. "We're slaughtering our own to save the Republic. Where's the liberty in that?" Desmoulins, his quill idle for once, nodded grimly. "Robespierre sees ghosts everywhere," he said. "But if we speak out, we're next." Danton, ever the pragmatist, urged moderation, but his voice was drowned by the committee's zeal. Jean-Paul Marat, the sans-culottes prophet, fueled the terror from his bathtub, where he soaked to ease his ravaged skin. His l'ami du peuple demanded more heads. "The Girondins are snakes, plotting our ruin," he wrote, targeting the moderate faction. In June 1793, the Girondins were purged from the National Convention, their leaders arrested or fled. Brissot, Madame Roland, and others faced trial, their eloquence no match for the tribunal's fury. By October, they knelt before the guillotine, their blood mingling with Paris's dust. Marat's triumph was short-lived. In July, a young woman named Charlotte Corday stabbed him in his bath, crying, "I've killed a monster." Her execution only deepened the committee's resolve. Marie Antoinette, the hated queen, met her end in October. Stripped of her finery, she climbed the scaffold with quiet defiance, her hair shorn and her face gaunt. I was a queen, and you took my crown, she reportedly whispered to the executioner. Now you take my life, but not my soul. The crowd jeered as the blade fell, but some wept, sensing the revolution's ideals slipping away. The king's death had been a necessity. The queen's felt like vengeance. Beyond Paris, the terror crushed rebellion. In the Vendée, royalist peasants rose against the Republic, their crosses and sacred hearts defying revolutionary tricolor. The committee sent armies to burn villages and execute rebels, leaving fields of corpses. In Lyon, a federalist revolt was smothered in blood, with thousands shot or guillotined. Terror is the order of the day, Saint-Just proclaimed, overseeing the carnage. The Republic's enemies, real and imagined, were everywhere. Yet, the terror was not just bloodshed. The committee reshaped France, enforcing price controls to feed the poor, abolishing slavery in the colonies, and replacing the Christian calendar with a republican one. Churches became temples of reason, and priests were forced to swear loyalty or face death. The sans-culottes, led by men like Jacques Hébert, demanded more total equality, the annihilation of wealth. Hébert's newspaper, Le Père Duchesne, rivaled Marot's in venom, but his extremism alarmed even Robespierre. Hébert dreams of chaos, not virtue. He muttered. Far from Paris, in the port of Toulon, a young artillery officer named Napoleon Bonaparte seized his moment. The city, held by royalists and British forces, defied the Republic. Napoleon, now 24, devised a plan to capture a key fort, his cannons pounding enemy positions with deadly precision. In December 1793, Toulon fell, and Napoleon's name echoed in Paris. Promoted to brigadier general, he caught the eye of Augustin Robespierre, Maximilian's brother. This Corsican has fire, Augustin wrote. Napoleon, ever calculating, saw the terror as both opportunity and warning. Power lies in action, he told his aide. Do not, but one misstep, and the blade awaits. In Paris, cracks appeared in the committee. Danton, tiring of bloodshed, called for an end to the terror in his newspaper. La Vieux Cordelier, penned by Desmoulins, let us govern by love, not fear, he urged. Robespierre, sensing weakness, accused Danton of corruption and leniency. Revolution cannot waver, he said, his voice icy. Hébert, on the other extreme, pushed for more violence, alienating moderates. By early 1794, both factions faced Robespierre's wrath. Hébert and his followers were guillotined in March, their radical dreams crushed. Danton's fate loomed. The sans-culottes, though loyal to the terror, grew restless. Bread remained scarce, and price controls faltered. Women like Pauline Léon, now a leader in the Society of Revolutionary Republican Women, marched on the convention, demanding justice. We gave you the Republic, Léon shouted, her voice hoarse. Feed our children. The committee, fearing revolt, banned women's clubs, driving Léon and her allies underground. The revolution, born of the people, now silenced them. Durais 1794 began. France was a paradox, a republic of ideals, drenched in blood. The terror had saved the nation from collapse, repelling foreign armies and crushing internal foes, but at a cost. Robespierre, Saint-Just, and their allies believed in a republic of virtue, but their methods bred fear. Danton, once a titan, wavered, his heart heavy with doubt. Napoleon, rising in the south, saw the chaos as a ladder to greatness. The guillotine's shadow stretched ever longer, and the revolution's soul hung in the balance. By the spring of 1794, Paris was a city suffocating under the weight of its own revolution. The Reign of Terror, orchestrated by the Committee of Public Safety, had saved the French Republic from foreign armies and internal rebels. But at a terrible cost. The guillotine's blade, now a grim metronome in the Place de la Révolution, claimed lives daily, nobles, priests, and revolutionaries alike. Maximilien Robespierre, once the revolution's moral compass, had become its unrelenting judge. His vision of a virtuous republic drowning in blood. Yet, the seeds of his downfall were sprouting, and a young general named Napoleon Bonaparte watched from the wings, his star rising. In the Jacobin Club, Robespierre stood before a tense crowd, his voice sharp as a blade. "The Republic demands purity," he declared, his pale face framed by a neatly powdered wig. "Enemies surround us within and without. We cannot falter." His allies, Louis-Antoine Saint-Just and Georges Couthon, flanked him, their loyalty unwavering. Saint-Just, with his cold, angelic features, added, "Those who waver betray the people." But the hall, once electric with support, now buzzed with unease. The Terror's relentless pace had turned friends into suspects, and even Jacobins whispered of Robespierre's growing paranoia. The committee's power was absolute, but cracks were forming. Georges Danton, the revolution's fiery voice, had dared to challenge the bloodshed. In his newspaper, Le Vieux Cordelier, penned by Camille Desmoulins, he called for mercy. "Terror without end is tyranny," Danton thundered in a tavern, his scarred face lit by candlelight. Desmoulins, his loyal friend, echoed him, his pamphlets urging a return to compassion. "We fought for liberty, not slaughter," he wrote, but Robespierre saw their words as treason. "Danton seeks to weaken us," he told Saint-Just, his eyes narrowing. "He must be silenced." In March 1794, the committee struck. Danton, Desmoulins, and their allies were arrested, charged with corruption and conspiring against the Republic. The trial, a farce overseen by Antoine Fouquier-Tinville, offered no defense. Danton, defiant to the end, roared from the dock, "You will follow me to the scaffold." Robespierre, Desmoulins, pale and trembling, clutched his wife's letters, whispering, "Lucille, forgive me." On April 5, they faced the guillotine. Danton's final words cut through the crowd, "Show my head to the people, it's worth seeing." The blade fell, and Paris shuddered. The revolution was devouring its giants. Robespierre's victory was hollow. The execution of Danton alienated moderates and radicals alike. The sans-culottes, once his allies, grew restless as bread prices soared despite price controls. Jacques Hebert's radical faction, crushed earlier in March, had left a void, and new voices, men like Joseph Fouché and Paul Barras, plotted in the shadows. Fouché, a former priest with a serpent's cunning, whispered to deputies in the National Convention, "Robespierre's terror will consume us all." Robespierre, a corrupt opportunist, nodded, sensing a chance to seize power. The terror intensified. The Law of 22 Prairial, drafted by Robespierre and Couthon, stripped defendants of rights, making accusation tantamount to conviction. The guillotine's pace quickened. claiming 400 lives in Paris alone during June and July. Nobles, shopkeepers, and even loyal Jacobins fell, their crimes often vague: hoarding, dissent, or simply suspicion. The city's prisons overflowed, and the stench of death clung to the streets. "This is not virtue," a baker muttered, watching a cart of condemned pass. "This is madness." Robespierre himself seemed haunted, sleepless and gaunt. He rarely left his modest apartment on the Rue Saint-Honoré, where he penned speeches and read Rousseau. "La Republique is my life," he told Couthon, his voice weary. "But the people doubt me." His festival of the Supreme Being, a grand ceremony to replace Catholicism with a civic religion, drew crowds but failed to quell dissent. The sans-culottes, loyal to the revolution, began to jeer. "We want bread, not festivals," a fishwife shouted, her voice echoing in the markets. In the south, Napoleon Bonaparte, now a brigadier general, observed the chaos with a strategist's eye. Stationed in Nice after his triumph at Toulon, he corresponded with Augustin Robespierre, Maximilian's brother, cultivating allies. Maximilian's brother, cultivating allies. "The committee is strong but brittle," he wrote to his brother Lucien. "Power shifts quickly in Paris." At 24, Napoleon's ambition burned. He studied maps, drilled troops, and dreamed of glory, sensing the revolution's turmoil. As a path to greatness, France needs order. He told his aide, "Junot, and I will give it." The end came swiftly. On July 27, 1794, 9 Thermidor, by the Republican calendar, the convention turned on Robespierre, Fouché, Barras, and others, fearing their own necks, orchestrated a coup. In a chaotic session, deputies denounced Robespierre as a tyrant. Saint-Just tried to rally support, but the hall erupted in shouts. "Down with the dictator." Robespierre, stunned, stammered, "The revolution is lost." He, Saint-Just, Couthon, and others were arrested, their fate sealed. The next day, July 28, Robespierre faced the guillotine. Saint-Just, shattered by a pistol shot during his arrest, was bandaged, and he uttered no final words. Saint-Just, stoic, died beside him, and Couthon followed. The crowd, once adoring, jeered as their heads fell. The Thermidorian reaction, as it was called, ended the terror, but not the chaos. The Directory, a 5-man executive, took power, its rule marked by corruption and weakness. The sans-culottes, betrayed, retreated to their slums, their dreams of equality fading. Sedan, Napoleon, in Nice, heard the news with a mix of relief and calculation. Robespierre's fall opens the door. He told Junot, "The Republic is adrift, and I will steer it." In Paris, the revolution's ideals, liberty, equality, fraternity lay battered, overshadowed by ambition and survival. As 1794 ended, France was a nation exhausted, but unbowed, its future in the hands of men like Napoleon, who saw not a cause, but an opportunity. In the spring of 1796, France was a nation adrift, its revolutionary fervor dulled by exhaustion and corruption. The Directory, the 5-man government that succeeded the terror, clung to power amid economic woes and royalist plots. Paris, once ablaze with ideals, now simmered with discontent, its markets sparse and its streets patrolled by weary soldiers. Yet, In the rugged hills of northern Italy, a young general named Napoleon Bonaparte was forging a legend, his victories breathing new life into a faltering republic. At 26, he was no longer a mere officer but a force, his ambition as boundless as the Alps he crossed. Napoleon stood on a windswept ridge near Nice, his lean frame wrapped in a worn blue coat. His army, the Army of Italy, was a ragtag force, 30 varos and men, underfed and poorly equipped, facing Austria's disciplined legions. "Soldiers," he shouted, his Corsican accent sharp, "you are hungry, half-naked, unpaid, but I will lead you to fertile plains, rich cities, and glory." His men, skeptical but desperate, cheered, their trust kindled by his fire. Napoleon's genius lay not just in tactics, but in inspiration, turning despair into defiance. In Paris, the Directory's leaders, Paul Barras, Jean-François Rebel, and others grappled with chaos. Bread riots erupted, and royalist pamphlets circulated in the shadows. The sans-culottes, once the revolution's heart, were subdued, their clubs disbanded, and their leaders scattered. "The people are tired," a baker muttered in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, tossing stale loaves to a crowd. The Directory, corrupt and divided, relied on military victories to bolster its legitimacy. Napoleon, dispatched to Italy, was their gamble, a young upstart to distract from their failures. Napoleon's campaign began with lightning speed. In April 1796, at Montenotte, he outmaneuvered Austrian and Piedmontese forces, his artillery shattering their lines. Days later, at Mondovì, he struck again, forcing Piedmont to sue for peace. Speed and surprise, he told his aide, "Fully, Berthier." In surprise, he told his aide, Louis Berthier, sketching plans by lamplight, "Ye divide their armies and crush them piecemeal." His men, fueled by loot and pride, marched through Italy's vineyards and villages, their tattered boots pounding the earth. By May, Milan, its gates flung open to the liberator, who promised republican ideals, but exacted heavy tributes. Napoleon's victories were not just military. He was a master of propaganda, dispatching glowing dispatches to Paris. His newspaper, Le Courrier de l'Armée d'Italie, painted him as a hero of the revolution, a David felling Goliath. In café, along the Seine, men read of his triumphs, their spirits lifted. "This Bonaparte is no ordinary general," a clerk remarked, clutching a broadsheet. Even the Directory, wary of his growing fame, could not deny his value. Barras, lounging in his opulent office, mused, "He wins battles, but his ambition is dangerous." In Italy, Napoleon faced relentless challenges. The Austrians, led by General Alvensi, counterattacked, and the fortress of Mantua held out, threatening his supply lines. At Lodi, in May 1796, he led a daring charge across a narrow bridge, his men braving cannon fire. "Follow me," he shouted, his saber gleaming. The victory, though costly, cemented his legend. At Arcueil, in November, he seized a flag and rallied his troops under a hail of bullets, turning defeat into triumph. "He's fearless," murmured André Massena, one of his generals, half in awe, half in envy. Napoleon's rule in Italy was a paradox. He proclaimed liberty, establishing sister republics modeled on France, but his armies plundered to sustain themselves. Italian peasants, initially welcoming, grew resentful as grain and gold vanished. We bring freedom, but they see only our boots. Napoleon confided to Berthier, untroubled. His vision was not revolution but power. Italy as a stepping stone to greatness. He negotiated the Treaty of Campo Formio in 1797, ceding Venice to Austria, but securing French gains. His diplomacy as sharp as his cannons. In Paris, the Directory's troubles deepened. A royalist uprising in 1795, crushed by Napoleon's whiff of grapeshot in Paris, had cemented his reputation. But new threats emerged. The radical Beth plotted a communist uprising, only to be betrayed and guillotined. The economy staggered, with asandats, revolutionary currency worthless. We print money, and it buys nothing. A market woman grumbled, her stall bare. The Directory, desperate, leaned on Napoleon's victories, but his fame unnerved them. He's a hero today, a king tomorrow, Rebel warned. Napoleon, aware of his growing myth, cultivated it. He sent artworks, Raphaels, Titians, looted from Italy to the Louvre, dazzling Parisians. His dispatches, read aloud in the convention, stirred patriotic pride. Yet, he remained distant, a Corsican outsider in a French world. They cheer me, but they don't know me, he told his brother Joseph, his eyes fixed on the horizon. His ambition now stretched beyond Italy. Egypt, he mused, could weaken Britain and crown him a conqueror like Alexander. In the provinces, the revolution's legacy frayed. Peasants, burdened by taxes and conscription, longed for stability. Former Jacobins, like Pauline Léon, now in hiding, despair. We dreamed of equality, but found only blades, she whispered to a friend, her revolutionary fire dim. The sans-culottes, silenced, nursed their grievances, while royalists plotted in chateau and émigré circles. France, united by Napoleon's victories, remained divided at its core. As 1797 ended, Napoleon returned to Paris, greeted as a savior. Crowds lined the streets, chanting his name. At a banquet hosted by Barras, he stood quietly, his sharp features unreadable. The Republic owes you much, Barras said, his smile forced. The Republic is my duty, Napoleon replied, his voice low. But his mind was elsewhere, on power, on empire, on a future he would shape. The Directory, weak and venal, was no match for his wit. The revolution's ideals, once bright, now flickered in the shadow of his ascent. By the autumn of 1799, France was a nation teetering on the edge of collapse. The Directory, the five-man government that had ruled since the fall of Robespierre, was crippled by corruption, economic turmoil, and military setbacks. Paris buzzed with discontent, its markets bare and its streets haunted by memories of revolution and terror. The ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity, once radiant, had faded under the weight of war and mismanagement. Into this chaos stepped Napoleon Bonaparte, now 30, his victories in Italy and Egypt burnishing his name. He saw not a republic in crisis, but a stage for his destiny. Napoleon returned to France in October, slipping past British naval patrols to land at Fréjus. His Egyptian campaign, though marred by defeats like the Battle of the Nile, was spun as a triumph through his propaganda. Parisians, starved for heroes, greeted him with fervor, crowding the streets to glimpse the slight, intense general with piercing eyes. "Bonaparte is our salvation," a cobbler shouted, waving a tricolor flag. The Directory, led by the venal Paul Barras and the scheming Emmanuel Sieyès, watched warily. "He's a comet," Barras muttered in his opulent office. But comets burn out. In a modest house on the Rue de la Victoire, Napoleon plotted with his brother Lucien, his aide Louis Berthier, and key allies like Sieyès and Joseph Fouché, the cunning ex-Jacobins. "The Directory is a rotting corpse," Napoleon said, his voice low but firm. "France craves order, and I will give it." Sieyès, a survivor of the revolution's twists, proposed a new constitution with a strong executive. "The Republic needs a sword," he said, eyeing Napoleon. Fouché, master of spies, nodded. "The people will follow you, but the army must lead." Lucien, now president of the Council of 500, promised to sway the legislature. The Directory's weakness was stark. Inflation had rendered a sonnets worthless, and bread riots flared in Paris. Royalist uprisings in the Vendée and Chouan rebellions in Brittany threatened the West, while Austria and Russia pressed French armies in Europe. The Second Coalition, formed to crush the Republic, gained ground, undoing Napoleon's Italian gains. "We're bankrupt, despised, and losing," a merchant grumbled in a cafe, tossing aside a newspaper. Sans-culottes, once the revolution's fire, were silent, their spirit broken by hunger and repression. Napoleon's plan, hatched with Sieyès, was a coup to replace the Directory with a consulate, naming him first consul. The pretext, a fabricated Jacobin plot to seize Paris, requiring the legislature to relocate to Saint-Cloud, where troops could protect it. On November 9, 1799, 18 Brumaire by the Republican calendar, the Council of Ancients, swayed by Sieyès, approved the move. Napoleon, backed by his loyal generals, Joachim Murat, John Lannes, and others, mobilized troops. "The Republic is in peril," he declared to his men, his voice ringing. "Will you follow me?" They roared assent, their bayonets gleaming. The coup began smoothly. In Paris, Fouché's police arrested potential opponents, while Murat's cavalry patrolled the streets. The Directory resigned under pressure, with Barras bribed into silence. But at Saint-Cloud on November 10, chaos erupted. The Council of 500, radical and suspicious, denounced Napoleon as a tyrant. "Down with the dictator," they shouted, brandishing daggers. Napoleon, entering the chamber, faltered under their jeers, his face pale. "I come to save the Republic," he stammered, but the deputies surged forward, forcing him to retreat. Lucien, presiding over the council, saved the day, declaring the chamber under threat. He rallied troops to clear the hall. "The revolution is betrayed," he cried, pointing to the deputies. Murat's grenadiers stormed in, bayonets fixed, scattering the legislators. By nightfall, a rump assembly, coerced by Lucien, voted to abolish the Directory and establish the consulate. With Napoleon as first consul, alongside Sieyès and Roger Ducos, a republic is reborn. Napoleon proclaimed, his composure restored, but the republic, as France knew it, was dead. As first consul, Napoleon moved swiftly to consolidate power. He crafted a new constitution, ratified by a rigged plebiscite, granting him near dictatorial authority. "The people want strength," not chaos, he told Bastille. Signing decrees late into the night, he reconciled factions, pardoning royalists and ex-Jacobins alike, while keeping Fauchet's police vigilant. The Bank of France, founded in 1800, stabilized the economy, replacing worthless assignats with the franc. Money is the lifeblood of order, Napoleon said, inspecting mint records. His reforms were sweeping. He streamlined administration, appointing prefects to govern provinces, and negotiated the Concordat of 1801 with the Pope, restoring Catholicism as a civic religion while curbing its power. The Church will serve the state, he declared, his pragmatism trumping revolutionary atheism. Education, roads, and legal codes were overhauled, laying the groundwork for the Napoleonic Code. I am the revolution's heir, he told his council, but his rule was authoritarian, silencing dissent with censorship and spies. On the battlefield, Napoleon struck decisively. In 1800, he led an army across the Alps, his men hauling cannons through snow to surprise the Austrians at Marengo. The victory, nearly a defeat until reinforcements arrived, restored French dominance in Italy. The Treaty of Luneville in 1801 ended the Second Coalition, securing peace with Austria. Peace is my gift to France, Napoleon declared, but his eyes were on Britain, the last major foe. In Paris, the sans-culottes watched in silence. Pauline Léon, once a revolutionary firebrand, now a seamstress, whispered to a friend, "We fought for equality, but got a new king." The revolution's ideals, liberty, fraternity, were buried under Napoleon's order. Yet, the people, weary of chaos, embraced him. Cafes buzzed with his name, and his portrait hung in homes. "He's no Robespierre," a baker said, kneading dough. He delivered. As 1800 dawned, Napoleon stood at France's helm, his power unmatched. The coup of Brumaire had ended the revolution's democratic dreams, replacing them with his vision of glory. In the Tuileries, where kings once ruled, he planned his next move, his mind racing. "France is mine," he told Joseph, his voice quiet but certain, "and the world will follow." The revolution was over, but Napoleon's empire was just beginning. In the winter of 1804, France stood transformed, its revolutionary chaos forged into order under Napoleon Bonaparte's iron will. The Republic, born in the fires of 1789, was no more. In its place rose an empire, crowned by a man who had once sworn to defend liberty. On December 2, in Notre Dame's gilded nave, Napoleon, now 35, placed a golden laurel crown upon his own head, proclaiming himself Emperor of the French. Pope Pius VII, a reluctant guest, watched as Napoleon crowned his wife, Josephine, Empress, her tears glinting in the candlelight. The revolution's ideals, liberty, equality, fraternity, lay buried beneath imperial pomp. Yet France, dazzled by prosperity and glory, cheered its new master. Paris, reborn under Napoleon's rule, buzzed with energy. The Tuileries Palace, once a royal prison, now housed an imperial court, its halls lined with silk and ambition. The city's streets, widened and paved, echoed with the clatter of carriages and the shouts of vendors. The Bank of France, established in 1800, stabilized the economy, and the franc replaced the worthless assignats. "Napoleon gives us bread and pride," a blacksmith said, hammering iron in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine. But dissenters, like the exiled Pauline Léon, whispered in hiding, "He's a king in republican clothes." Napoleon's reforms were his empire's foundation. The Napoleonic Code, enacted in 1804, unified France's laws, blending revolutionary equality with Roman tradition. It guaranteed property rights, secular contracts, and civil liberties, but curtailed women's freedoms, reflecting Napoleon's conservatism. "The law is my sword," he told his Council of State, poring over drafts. He reformed education, creating lycée to train loyal elites, and rebuilt infrastructure, roads, canals, bridges, to bind the nation. The Concordat of 1801 restored the church's role, but under state control. "Religion is a tool," he confided to his brother Lucien, "and I wield it." Yet, Napoleon's true passion was war. The Peace of Amiens with Britain, signed in 1802, collapsed in 1803, reigniting conflict. The Third Coalition, Austria, Russia, and Britain, formed to curb his ambitions. Napoleon, commanding the Grande Armée, a disciplined force of 200,000, planned to invade England. His camp at Boulogne bristled with ships and cannons, but Britain's navy, led by Nelson, held the Channel. "If I control the sea for 6 hours, England is mine," Napoleon growled to Admiral Villeneuve, his patience thin. The invasion never came, but his pivot was masterful. In 1805, Napoleon marched east, his army a whirlwind of speed and precision. At Ulm, he trapped an Austrian army, forcing its surrender without a shot. On December 2, at Austerlitz, he faced the combined forces of Austria and Russia. "This is my masterpiece," he told Marshal Davout, sketching plans on a map. Feigning weakness, he lured the enemy into a trap, then struck, his cannons roaring across the frozen fields. The victory, won on the anniversary of his coronation, crushed the Third Coalition. The Treaty of Pressburg forced Austria out of the war, and Napoleon's empire expanded, swallowing northern Italy and Germany's western states. "Europe is my canvas," he declared, his eyes alight. In Paris, Napoleon's victories fueled a cult of personality. His image stern, heroic adorned coins, statues, and paintings. The Arc de Triomphe, begun in 1806, promised to immortalize his triumphs. Newspapers, censored by his minister Charles Maurice de Talleyrand, sang his praises. "He's our Caesar," a clerk said in a cafe, raising a glass. But Talleyrand, ever the cynic, warned, "Empires built on war die by it." Fouché's police, ubiquitous, silenced critics, and royalist plots, like the 1804 attempt by Georges Cadoudal, ended in executions. "I am France," Napoleon told his court, "and France obeys." The empire's reach was vast. Napoleon created the Confederation of the Rhine, a German buffer against Austria, and placed his brothers on thrones, Joseph in Naples, Louis in Holland, Jerome in Westphalia. "My family will bind Europe," he said, ignoring their incompetence. He abolished the Holy Roman Empire, redrawing maps with a conqueror's pen. But Britain, unyielding, remained his obsession. The Continental System, a blockade to starve British trade, began in 1806, but it strained Europe's economies. Sowing resentment, "Britain is a thorn," he muttered, studying naval reports. In 1806, Prussia, provoked by Napoleon's arrogance, joined a fourth coalition. At Jena-Auerstedt, Napoleon's army obliterated Prussian forces in a single day, his cavalry thundering through fog and mud. "Speed is my weapon," he told Marat, watching the rout. Berlin fell, and Napoleon entered as a conqueror, his boots echoing in Frederick the Great's palace. The Treaty of Tilsit in 1807, signed with Russia's Tsar Alexander on a raft in the Niemen River, divided Europe between them. "We are allies," Napoleon said, clasping Alexander's hand, but his smile hid distrust. At home, Napoleon's personal life mirrored his empire's strain. Josephine, unable to bear an heir, faced his growing distance. "I love her, but I need a dynasty," he told Talleyrand, his voice heavy. Rumors of divorce swirled, and Josephine's tears did little to sway him. His court, glittering but rigid, masked tensions. Marshals like Ney and Davout, loyal but proud, chafed under his micromanagement. "He trusts no one," Ney grumbled, polishing his saber. The empire's cost was mounting. Conscription drained villages, and taxes burdened the poor. In Spain, Napoleon's 1808, in Staling's 1808 invasion, installing Joseph as king, sparked rebellion. Guerrilla warfare bled his armies, a wound that festered. "Spain is a trap," Talleyrand warned. But Napoleon pressed on. Talleyrand warned. But Napoleon pressed on, blind to the limits of his power. The revolution's egalitarian dreams, once chanted by sans-culottes, were now a faint echo, replaced by imperial decrees. As 1808 dawned, Napoleon stood at his zenith, his empire stretching from Lisbon to Warsaw. Yet, cracks were forming. Britain's navy ruled the seas, Russia's alliance wavered, and Spain bled his resources. In Paris, the people still cheered, but some, like a weary baker, muttered, "Glory fills no bellies." Napoleon, gazing from the Tuileries, dreamed of eternal conquest. "I am destiny," he whispered, his ambition boundless. But destiny, like the revolution he had tamed, was a fickle master. By 1810, Napoleon Bonaparte's empire stretched across Europe, a colossus forged by genius and ambition. From Lisbon to Warsaw, his decrees reshaped nations, and his Grande Armée, a disciplined juggernaut, humbled kings. Paris, the empire's heart, glittered with imperial splendor, grand boulevards, triumphal arches, and the Louvre's looted treasures. Yet, beneath the surface, cracks were widening. The continental system's starved economies, rebellions simmered, and Napoleon's insatiable drive for conquest sowed the seeds of his downfall. The revolution's ideals, once a beacon, were now a distant memory, buried under the weight of empire. In the Tuileries palace, Napoleon, now 40, paced his study. Maps sprawled across his desk. His face, once lean, was fuller, his eyes still sharp but shadowed by fatigue. "Europe is mine, but Britain defies me," he told his foreign minister, Charles Maurice de Talleyrand, his voice edged with frustration. Talleyrand, ever the diplomat, bowed. "Sire, blockades weaken us as much as them," he cautioned. But Napoleon waved him off. The continental system, his plan to choke British trade, was faltering, alienating allies like Russia and burdening French merchants. "Victory will silence doubters," Napoleon snapped, his mind already on the next campaign. France prospered, but at a cost. The Napoleonic Code, now law across the empire, ensured order, but conscription drained villages. "My son marches for glory, but I pray for his return," a farmer muttered in Brittany, sharpening his sight. Taxes funded wars, and the sans-culottes, once the revolution's voice, were silent, their dreams of equality replaced by imperial edicts. In Paris, Fouché's police crushed dissent, and newspapers sang Napoleon's praises. "He's our shield," a baker said, kneading dough, but added softly, "Yet shields are heavy." Napoleon's personal life mirrored his empire's strain. In 1810, he divorced Josephine, his beloved but barren wife, to marry Marie-Louise, the 18-year-old daughter of Austria's emperor. "I wed a womb," he told his brother Joseph, his voice hollow. Josephine, heartbroken, retired to Malmaison, her tears a private wound. Marie-Louise bore a son, the King of Rome, in 1811, securing Napoleon's dynasty. "My blood will rule," he declared, cradling the infant. But the marriage, a cold alliance, deepened his isolation. "He loves power more than people," Talleyrand whispered to a confidant. The empire's zenith came in 1811, with Napoleon ruling directly or through puppets. Joseph in Spain, Louis in Holland, Jerome in Westphalia. The Confederation of the Rhine and the Duchy of Warsaw obeyed his will, and the Holy Roman Empire was a memory. Yet, resistance grew. In Spain, guerrillas and British troops under Wellington bled French forces, turning Napoleon's 1808 invasion into a quagmire. "Spain is an ulcer," Marshal Ney grumbled, his dispatches grim. Portugal, aided by Britain, defied French control, and the continental system's failures fueled smuggling. Russia, Napoleon's uneasy ally since Tilsit, became his obsession. Tymthis's Tsar Alexander, chafing under the blockade, resumed trade with Britain in 1811. "He betrays me," Napoleon fumed, studying maps of the Russian steppe. Against Talleyrand's advice, he planned an invasion, amassing the Grande Armée, 600,000 men from France, Germany, Italy, and Poland. "I'll crush Moscow in a summer," he told Marshal Davout, ignoring warnings of Russia's vastness. In June 1812, he crossed the Neman River, his army a tide of bayonets and banners. "This is my greatest gamble," he said, his voice steady but his heart racing. The Russian campaign was a catastrophe. The Russians, under Kutuzov, avoided battle, scorching crops and villages as they retreated. "They burned their own land to starve us," Murat cursed, his cavalry weakened by hunger. At Borodino, in September, Napoleon won a bloody victory, but the cost, 70,000 dead or wounded, was staggering. Moscow, abandoned, greeted him with silence. Days later, fires engulfed the city, leaving ash and ruin. "This is no triumph," Napoleon muttered, staring at the flames. With winter looming and no surrender, he ordered a retreat in October. The retreat was a nightmare. Cossacks harried the Grande Armée, and blizzards tore through tattered ranks. "We march to die," a Polish conscript whispered, clutching his frost-bitten hands. By December, only 50,000 staggered back, the rest dead, deserted, or captured. Napoleon, abandoning his army to Davout, raced to Paris to quell rumors of his death. "I live, and France endures," he declared, but his invincibility was shattered. "He's mortal after all," a Parisian clerk said, reading smuggled broadsheets. The Russian disaster emboldened Europe. In 1813, a sixth coalition, Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Britain formed. Sensing weakness, Napoleon, rallying a new army, won at Lutzen and Bautzen, but his forces, young and untrained, fought. "I need veterans, not boys," he told Berthier, his voice hoarse. At Leipzig, the Battle of the Nations in October 1813, 600,000 men clashed, the largest battle Europe had seen. Napoleon, outnumbered, fought fiercely, but his lines broke. "Retreat," he shouted, his voice lost in the cannon's roar. The defeat ended his German Empire, and the Confederation of the Rhine collapsed. And home, Napoleon's grip weakened. Talleyrand, plotting with royalists, whispered of restoration. "The empire is a sinking ship," he told Fouché, his eyes gleaming. Marie-Louise, loyal but overwhelmed, struggled as regent. The French, weary of war, grew restless. "He promised peace, but gives us graves," a widow said, sewing black cloth. In Spain, Wellington's victories drove Joseph from Madrid, and Napoleon's brothers, inept rulers, lost their thrones. "My family fails me," Napoleon sighed, reading dispatches. Napoleon fought on, his genius flickering. In 1814, he defended France with a small army, winning skirmishes but losing ground. "I am still emperor," he told Ney, his face gaunt. But Paris fell in March, and his marshals, exhausted, urged abdication. On April 6, at Fontainebleau, Napoleon signed his abdication, exiled to Elba, a tiny island. "I am nothing," he whispered, staring at his sword. Marie-Louise and his son fled to Austria, and Josephine, hearing the news, died of a broken heart. The Bourbons, led by Louis XIII, returned, their white flags a bitter symbol. As 1814 ended, Napoleon, on Elba, gazed at the sea, his mind racing. "France will call me back," he told his aide. Dan said it, his mind racing. "France will call me back," he told his aide. Bertrand, his voice firm. The empire, built on the revolution's ashes, had crumbled, its glory undone by hubris. In France, the people, its glory undone by hubris. In France, the people, ruled by a feeble king, whispered of the man who had made them great. The revolution's dreams were gone, but Napoleon's shadow lingered, ready to rise again. In the spring of 1814, Napoleon Bonaparte, once Emperor of the French, was a fallen titan, exiled to Elba, a speck of an island in the Mediterranean. His empire, which had spanned Europe, lay in ruins, undone by the disastrous Russian campaign and the Sixth Coalition's relentless advance. France, weary of war, had welcomed the Bourbons' return under Louis XIII, whose white flags fluttered over Paris. Yet, the revolution's legacy and Napoleon's shadow lingered, and the stage was set for one final act. By 1815, the world would witness his last gamble, and the ideals of 1789 would face their ultimate test. On Elba, Napoleon, now 45, stood on a rocky cliff, his eyes fixed on the horizon. His hair, thinning and graying, framed a face etched with determination. "France is not done with me," he told his aide, Henri Bertrand, his voice firm. Elba, with its vineyards and dusty villages, was a cage for a man who had ruled millions. He governed the island like a miniature empire, building roads and drilling his small guard. But his mind was on Paris. News of Louis XIII's faltering rule, taxes, royalist arrogance, and discontent among soldiers reached him through smuggled letters. The Bourbons learned nothing, he muttered, folding a dispatch. In March 1815, Napoleon seized his chance. Slipping past British patrols, he sailed to France with 1,000 men. Landing at Gulf Juan, "Why return to save France?" he declared, his trottoir raised. His march north, the flight of the eagle, was a triumph of charisma. Soldiers sent to arrest him, veterans of the Grande Armée, joined him instead, tears in their eyes. "Vive l'Empereur," they shouted, throwing down royalist cockades. At Grenoble, crowds cheered, and by Laon, his army swelled to 7,000. "I am France's heart," he told Marshal Ney, who defected to his side, forsaking his oath to the king. On March 20, Napoleon entered Paris, the Tuileries abandoned by Louis XIII, who fled to Ghent. The 100 Days, as his return was called, began with fervor. "I will restore the revolution's glory," he promised cheering crowds, his voice echoing in the Place du Carrousel. He issued decrees, abolishing feudal titles and promising a liberal constitution, but his focus was war. The coalition Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia declared him an outlaw, vowing to crush his reborn empire. "They fear me still," Napoleon said to his brother Joseph, his eyes gleaming. Napoleon rebuilt his army, scraping together 200,000 men, many young conscripts or recalled veterans. "We lack the old fire," Marshal Davout warned, inspecting ragged ranks. Napoleon, undaunted, planned a strike against the coalition's armies in Belgium, led by Britain's Wellington and Prussia's Blucher. "One victory, and Europe will bow," he told his staff, poring over maps. In June 1815, he marched north, his army a shadow of its former might, but driven by his will. "This is my last throw," he confided to Bertrand, his voice heavy. The campaign began well. At Ligny, Napoleon defeated Blucher's Prussians, sending them reeling. But on June 18, at Waterloo, his fate was sealed. Facing Wellington's disciplined lines, Napoleon attacked, his cannons pounding through rain-soaked fields. "Break their center," he shouted, directing Marshal Ney's cavalry. But missteps Ney's reckless charges. Grouchy's failure to block Blucher doomed him. The Prussians, rallying, joined Wellington, and Napoleon's lines crumbled. "All is lost," he whispered, watching his guard retreat. By nightfall, his army was routed, 40,000 dead or wounded. Napoleon fled to Paris, his empire shattered. "I cannot fight without France," he told Davout, his face ashen. On June 22, he abdicated again, naming his 4-year-old son, the King of Rome, as successor. The gesture was futile. The Bourbons returned, and the coalition occupied Paris. Napoleon, seeking exile in America, surrendered to the British aboard the Bellerophon. "I am their prisoner," he said, his voice calm but bitter. Exiled to Helena, a remote Atlantic island, He arrived in October 1815, his world reduced to a damp house and a handful of loyalists. Helena, Napoleon, gaunt and ailing, reflected on his life. I gave France order, glory, law. He told his companion, Emmanuel de las Cases, dictating memoirs. The revolution was my spark, but I burned too brightly. He spoke of Marat's fury, Robespierre's zeal, Danton's fire, men who shaped a nation he had molded. Liberty was their dream, but men crave a master. He mused, gazing at the sea. His health faded, plagued by stomach pain, likely cancer, and he died on May 5, 1821, at 51. France, Army, Josephine. He murmured, his last words a fragmented legacy. France, under Louis XVIII, struggled to reconcile its past. The Bourbons restored old privileges, but the revolution seeds equality before the law, secularism, nationalism. In the Napoleonic Code shaped legal systems worldwide, and the tricolor, though banned, lived in memory. Napoleon was our storm, the Parisian printer said, setting type. He broke us, but made us. The sans-culottes, now laborers, whispered of 1789, their dreams dormant but not dead. Pauline Léon, aged and obscure, smiled faintly, hearing young radicals in cafes. We planted the tree, she said. Others will harvest it. Napoleon's legacy was paradox. He crushed the revolution's democracy, but spread its principles meritocracy, legal reform, national pride. His wars killed millions but reshaped Europe, ending feudalism and sparking nationalism. He was a comet, Talleyrand said in Paris, sipping wine, dazzling, then gone. In Helena, Napoleon's grave, unmarked at his captor's insistence, lay silent, but his myth endured, fueling revolutions and dreams of glory. As 1821 dawned, France faced an uncertain future, its monarchy fragile, its people restless. The revolution and Napoleon had forged a nation, but its soul, liberty, equality, fraternity, remained a promise unfulfilled. In villages and cities, men and women, from bakers to scholars, carried the spark of 1789, ready to flare again. Napoleon, the revolution's heir and destroyer, had played his final act, but the stage he left was vast, its curtain far from fallen.